Good morning. Good morning. A few of us in the room, more will come, I know, and more online, and hopefully off into the future. Folks will be returning to this. I'm really excited. You may know that we can't invite anybody to speak at Calvary who's not comfortable being in a hard hat area, and Anasa and Brooke are very comfortable navigating hard hat areas because it's a bit of chaos here. But when Catherine said she'd reached out, I was thrilled. Claiborne Temple is a storied place. It's a sacred, important place in Memphis' story. And the nation's story. We'll hear more about that, I know. But as I was looking through some of the things Anasa's done, she's a writer, director, producer, real estate developer. I've never spoken those four things from the same CV that I can recall. So she does a lot of things, but they are all around I think the transformative power of story and how it can lead to a more just and equitable society. And sometimes story has to show up in the way our buildings are built. Sometimes it has to relate to the way we talk to each other, the way we develop our properties. Anyway, I'm fascinated at the way Anasa has brought some of these things together in her work in the world. What a brilliant combination of skills and experience and expertise and passion to be leading the restoration of this space in our city. In this Garden and Gun article that recently came out on it, Anasa said, Claiborne Temple will be a cultural arts center for storytelling, performance, and the cultivation of the social imagination. I love that. I think you did. You were quoted. Own it. Somebody said you said that. It's a wonderful thing to have said, but this vision for this space. Anyway, welcome, Anasa. We're so glad to have you here.
Good morning. I never remember what I say. So whenever I read something I say, I go, oh my God, I'm so impressive. So good. Well, good morning. Again, my name is Anasa Troutman. I am a cultural strategist, and all those other things is all a outgrowth of the fact that I believe in culture as a transformative thing in the world. I am the founder and CEO of the Big We. The Big We really is about how we leverage all of our innate cultural assets for cultural power, for economic power, for narrative power for all people. Our work at the Big We began with Claiborne Temple. It was our first acquisition in 2019, and we've been working ever since to really think about the beauty of Memphis and how we help Memphians see and leverage and grow its own beauty and power for all of our folks who live here. So this is historic Claiborne Temple. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in, to be honest. And the first time I ever walked into Claiborne, it took my breath away. And I didn't even live here. I just knew that I wanted to be connected to this building because of the beauty of it inside, because of the energy that was in there. And then learning about the architecture, it's a really unique and special place. A lot of people know Claiborne as a historically significant place, but before it was on the registry for history, it was on the registry for architecture, which is things that people don't really know. So this building, the architecture style is called Romanesque Revival. At the time that it was built in 1892, it was only one of two of these kinds of buildings in the entire region. And so it was a really special place. It also had the biggest organ in the region, which you have to remember, I'm soft on the organ right now because our organ was just removed on Monday to go get fixed. And so I have to give her a little shine. But our organ, the building was built in a time before electricity. And so the chandeliers were candles. The organ, they had to send 3 men up in the attic to be able to pump these big giant wooden things for 20 minutes before the organ, so the organ could have air to play during the thing. So this building is really, really special. But of course, people really know our building for its historical significance. So everybody in here know the story of the sanitation worker strike? I'm going to tell you anyway. So, good morning, Anna. So, in 1968, after years actually of trying to have a union and being thwarted by the city government, there were two sanitation workers who were killed in the back of a garbage truck. They had notoriously low wages, notoriously dangerous working conditions, and because when it rained, if they were sent home, they did not get pay. So when it rained, they did everything that they could to be able to stay at work. Their motto was just keep working. And so one day it rained, and in order to protect themselves from the rain, they got in the back of the truck, and the truck malfunctioned and crushed the two workers to death. And the rest of the workers were like, that's enough. We've spent too much time being unsafe, being disrespected, having our families being in danger, and so we're going to take a stand. And then they went on this incredible strike that literally changed history here in Memphis and around the world. The strike is known for these famous, iconic I am a man signs. This is the strike that brought King to Memphis when he was assassinated here. And there's so many other luminaries that we could talk about, but I don't have time to talk about today. So I encourage you really to dig into this work. So I was brought to Memphis because of this story to be able to write a play about it. I came here for 6 months in 2018, being asked to co-write and executive produce a musical about the sanitation worker strike for MLK 50. And if you've ever written a musical before about something that really happened, you'll know there's a lot of research that goes into this work. And so I spent months just reading about Memphis and reading about the strike and reading about all of the history of Memphis before the strike. And I came across an article about a man named Robert Church in my research. How many people here have heard of Robert Church? Oh my God, you guys, that's so good. Okay, what a group. We can have a real conversation. Amazing. So, when I read the story of Robert Church and how he was formerly enslaved and he grew this real estate empire and became the first black millionaire in America, and all the things that he did, Ida B. Wells, W.C. Handy, Beale Street, saving Memphis with the first municipal bond, all these things that I read about him, and I was so excited. And then I read about how his empire was dismantled intentionally, brick by brick, literally burned to the ground. And I realized that the story that we were telling about the sanitation workers and about Mayor Loeb was just an extension of the story about Robert Church and E.H. Crump. And this was not a new story. It was not new information. It was not a new legacy. And then I decided to go a little bit further back. And I realized that Memphis was a way station on the Trail of Tears. And I realized that Memphis was the capital of the cotton trade during enslavement. And I realized that Memphis was the home of the first Grand Wizard of the KKK. And I realized that Robert Church and the sanitation workers, and what I understood looking at Memphis from a hundreds of years history, is that this intersection of race and class in America is concentrated here in Memphis, Tennessee. And so much of our story as Americans lives in this city, lives in this dirt, lives in the air, and that if we could trace the past of race and class in America, in Memphis, then we should be able to map the future of race and class in America, in Memphis. And Memphis became, in an instant, the most important city in the world to me. And I decided that my 6 months would turn into, I don't know, I'm still here. It's been 7 years. It's been 7 years. So I moved to Memphis, and a year after I moved here, we acquired historic Claiborne Temple. We purchased it from Memphis Leadership Foundation, and we started to do a renovation. So this is what Claiborne will look like one day. So far, we've been renovating officially for 2.5, 3 years now. We have obviously done our first stage, which was acquisition and stabilization. The building was not safe when we first moved into it. We were open for a little while and did a whole bunch of programming, and then we closed and did phase 2, which was the exterior envelope. So at this point, the entire, every inch of the outside of the building has been renewed, refreshed, or replaced. I know y'all know what that's like. It took us 2 years and $6 million to completely renovate the outside of the building. the thing I think that we're most proud of, there's so many things that happened because, the building was unstable, the roof was falling in, the windows were busted, we had to replace the whole south wall. Do y'all know we have a stone wall, this wall right here? It's 100-something-year-old wall made of stone that was falling. And we had to have it taken down stone by stone, mapped on the ground in the parking lot, numbered and rebuilt so that it would be exactly the way that it was. It took 6 months just to do that. So this is not easy work. But the thing that we're most proud of is our stained glass windows. And to your earlier point, this really is about how we tell this story. And we saw the stained glass windows as an opportunity to be a mechanism for storytelling. And so when you're doing a historic project, things that are already destroyed, you can replace and reimagine them. And so we took this opportunity to really think about how we tell the story, and we were able to commission 2 local artists and have them reimagine the windows and tell the story of the strike in the murals in the windows. It is so beautiful. I was just saying I should have all of y'all to Claiborne so y'all can come and see the building and come see the windows and hear a little bit more about the story. So the thing for me is, when you were listening to earlier, like, I'm now a real estate developer instead of, right? And it's because it was an easy leap for me because my work is not attached to a career path. My work has always been attached to a vision for our collective future as human beings. And this pathway that I've taken to just think about how to sit in the story of who we are and who we can be as the way that I want to show up in the world has been a transformative path that led me to think about land and buildings and stories that live in those buildings and how we can elevate those stories to be able to help us to be better than we are now. And the truth is that my relationship to story is really about culture. I'm not actually committed to storytelling. I'm actually committed to cultural transformation. And what I know is that story is the most powerful way to get that done. And when we think about culture, and we think about culture as like who we are collectively, the decisions that we've made about how we show up as human beings is really dictated by our culture. And our culture is dictated by a set of core values. And for me, the core value that we should be embodying is love. That, to me, is the future of humanity, is us learning how to embody love as a core value to build a new culture that allows every human being to be able to experience love, abundance, safety, and joy as a baseline, no matter what, no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter where you come from. Love is a thing that we should be feeling for each other and for ourselves. I did a lot of writing about love several years ago because I really was trying to dig into this idea of what it means to love. I talked about love for so long that one of my friends called me one day and he said, okay, fine, I get it. Love, we have to love each other. Fine. But what does that even mean? And I was like, oh God, I don't know. No. And so I had to take a step back and I had to really think about what I mean when I talk about love. And when I say we have to learn how to build a culture of love, what does that mean? And so I wrote a definition of love that I would love to share with you. You don't have to make this your definition, but when I talk about love, this is what I'm talking about. I define love as the act of honoring one's connection to another in thought, word, and deed. Now, I'm going to read that one more time. Honoring one's connection to another in thought, word, and deed. My definition presupposes that you believe that you're connected to all humanity. Everyone doesn't believe that. But I do, and I think that folks who have deep religious practice, kind of like the core of our religious spaces, is like that we're connected, that we're all God's children, that we are all equal in the eyes of God, and therefore our connection can never be taken apart. So if that's true, then the question of love is about what does it mean for you to be connected to another human being, and what does that mean for the thoughts that you send them, the acts that you have towards them, and the things that you say. What does that mean for somebody who you see every day, right? It's easy to think about how you love your child. Yes. I love my child. Here's what that looks like. It's easy to love your pastor, right? How dare you? But what does it mean if we're talking about loving a stranger who you'll never meet? There is a woman right now on the river Danube who you will never meet her, but she's still connected to you, and how do you love her? Or how do you love people who have actually harmed you? They are still connected to you. They are still part of the human family, and we must also love them, but what does that look like? And most of all, how do you love yourself? That's not something that we ever get taught. My favorite part of the Bible is where the person is like, this is a lot of rules, Jesus. How are we supposed to do all this? And Jesus is like, don't worry. It's only one or two things you got to do. You got to love God, yeah, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. But if we are not taught what loving ourselves look like, how are we supposed to know how to love our neighbor? It is a very, very difficult thing to do. So this to me is like, this is my life's work, to figure out what love looks like and how we can leverage story to help teach ourselves and others. The reason why that works so well at Claiborne Temple and why Claiborne Temple is such a beautiful, beautiful vessel to be able to have this conversation about love is because of this guy. This is Reverend James Lawson, who we recently lost, but who has become over the past 7 years one of my heroes. Reverend Lawson, well, let me tell you about Reverend Lawson first, and then I'll tell you. So Reverend Lawson is most known because he was the architect of nonviolence. So many people credit Dr. King with this brilliant idea of nonviolent organizing, but really it was James Lawson who brought that information to King. So they met in the 50s. Reverend Lawson was a student, and he had already traveled all over India and all over the continent of Africa as a missionary. And in his time in India, he had learned about Gandhian nonviolence. And in his mind, he was like, whoa, this is the thing that we need in the States. This is going to be the way that we can get this work done. And so when he comes back to the States, he meets Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and King is like, you can't wait till you graduate. You have to come south now. We need you now. And so Reverend Lawson packs up, and he comes to the South, and he becomes the architect of this strategy of nonviolence. And eventually ends up in Memphis. There's a lot that happened in between. So if you don't know about Reverend Lawson, go read about him. But eventually he ends up in Memphis. He's a pastor at Centenary Methodist in Soulsville. And then the strike happens that I told you about earlier in February of 1968. And because of his relationship to movement, because of his relationship to community, Reverend Lawson becomes the head of the strategy committee for the strike. So Reverend Lawson's relationship to love is what I always go back to. Reverend Lawson said that love is a powerful force that can be used to create a more just and equitable society. He taught that love is the most creative power in the universe, and that people need to learn how to use it. Reverend Lawson grew up in a house like mine. I grew up in a house where like community and politics and spirituality and art and culture were all the same conversation. So they were not separate in my home. And Reverend Lawson grew up in a similar house, and he came to become this person because of a pivotal moment in his life where he was at school. A young white kid called him a racial slur, and he slapped him in the face. And he went home, and his mother said, now, Jimmy, what good did that do? Is that how you want to be in the world? And that was the beginning of his pathway to nonviolence and to love as a core strategy for transformation. I asked Reverend Lawson once, I was so mad at him. I asked him, I said, okay, I get it, but what do you do? How do you love people who have caused generational harm? How do you love people who don't even know how to look you in the face and see you as human? And do you know what he said to me? He said, well, that's the work now, isn't it? I'll never forgive him for that. Reverend Lawson also taught us about plantation capitalism, which I think is really, really, really important, especially in this conversation about love, because when we talk about the transformation of humanity, we talk about healing, specifically around race and class, we really focus on those who have been oppressed. right? We focus on communities, we focus on Black communities, on poor communities, right? That we focus our attention on those folks. But the thing that Reverend Lawson teaches us about plantation capitalism, which is really like our American economic system that was grown out of the practice of enslavement, right? The practice that told us that you can take a group of people and have them give everything that they have for free, right? And that the practice of working from sun up to sundown without regard to your humanity, if it is there, is acceptable. So not only did that create a certain economic system, but it also created ideas and beliefs about work and how we show up and how we relate to each other. So Reverend Lawson would say that yes, while there are some folks who are suffering more around the economic side on plantation capitalism and the effect of it, that we are all suffering from the result of enslavement in America. We're all suffering. And some would say that folks whose ancestors were enslavers are actually suffering more because of the separation on the inside, the allowing of love to not be present when it comes to other people, right? I always used to talk about this false idea that you can be separate from other human beings and what that does to you. And that this lie of separation can lead from you slapping someone in the face. It can also lead to something as extreme as genocide. So all the things that we do to each other in the world are from this lie that we are not the same, that we are not in the same family, that we are not all God's children, and that we do not relate to each other in a space of love. And Reverend Lawson talked about that all the time. When I think about what that means for us at Claiborne and how we help transform the material condition of Memphians, all Memphians, it makes me think of the future of Claiborne, because we always knew that Claiborne was not enough. We love this city, we love these stories, and we want Memphis to become what Memphis can become. And our contribution up until this point has been historic Claiborne Temple, but we always knew that that wasn't going to be enough. Because if you step outside Claiborne Temple and you look to the right, you see downtown. If you look to the left, you see a lot of blight, a lot of empty land, a lot of former neighborhoods, right? A lot of places where people used to live, a lot of places where Vance Avenue, which is right at Claiborne Temple, was the hub of middle-class Black ownership. That's where it was popping. It was happening. That's where it was going down. And you look there now, there's nothing. There's empty buildings, there's no buildings, there's trash, right? And so for us at Claiborne Temple, we always knew, like, we have to think about not just restoring this building, but restoring this neighborhood. And how do we do that? And what we've come to is that, back to this power of story, is that we know that the story that we tell at Claiborne Temple actually exists in many spaces. And that many, 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 many historic buildings in this city, specifically in our neighborhood, are sharing the same vision of the future and the same experience of the past. And so we have started to do this work to think about how we network these stories together and leverage them to be able to think about what it means to be able to tell a new story in Memphis. And so we have been working with 25 or so other historic spaces in the city to be able to think about what Claiborne looks like, not just as a singular building, but as a hub for a new story for the city, specifically for downtown and South Memphis, from Beale Street all the way to Soulsville. Because like I said earlier, what we know is there are so many cultural assets in this city that have not been exercised, and that can be leveraged not just to be able to tell the story of people that come to visit Memphis, but that can actually be leveraged to tell Memphians a new story about themselves and to create new possibilities around community ownership, around public safety, around environmental sustainability, right? And about storytelling. And to think about what it means for us to create a new culture grounded in love and the future for ourselves and for the folks who live here. And so when you think about Claiborne, you have to think about National Civil Rights Museum. You have to think about First Baptist Beale, where Ivy Wells had her newspaper church. You have to think about R.S. Lewis Funeral Home or King Layden State. You have to think about Robert Church and his home, Robert Church Auditorium, all of his offices. You have to think about Beale Street in the old Daisy. You have to think about Ernest Withers. You have to think about the Negro League Stadium that was right around the corner. All of these things exist in 2 miles of each other. Most of them exist within 4 blocks of each other. But we're not telling the story to remind ourselves who we actually are, which allows us to remember who we can be if we work together. I love saying that. It makes me feel so good. I do. I believe in this city so much, and I believe that Memphis can teach the rest of the country something. We have so much pain here and so much richness and so much opportunity for transformation, and I really believe that if we can work together to figure it out in Memphis, we have a model that folks can use across the region and across the nation, and we actually can be a leader in what the future of our country looks like. So I want to talk about Reverend Lawson for one more second, and then I'm going to stop talking because I want to hear from y'all. Reverend Lawson was the last person to speak at Claiborne before we closed for a renovation. It was our very last event, and he was the last speaker at that event. And in his closing remarks, he said something that I feel like is our path, the guiding light that we are following, and I'm going to end with Reverend Lawson's words, and then we can have a chat. In his closing remarks, he talked about his friend John T. Fisher, which I know some of y'all knew, and how they would sit all the time and talk about how Memphis should be one of the leading cities in setting the standard for the transformation of our nation. And this is what he said to us. The potential is here, he said. The geography is here. The region is a region coming out of the old South, the old plantation capitalism, with literally millions of people who live in 5 states who could be affected by this city, not as a primary service center, but as a hearing, listening, and truthing center. The possibility is astonishing. Transform Claiborne, he said, into a new social, cultural, musical, artistic, spiritual center here in Memphis. This transformation is crucial if Memphis is to become the kind of city that it can become. In line with the vision of a new heaven and a new earth, there must be a new Memphis, new forms of justice and truth. It's a pretty big task, but it's a doable one, something that can be done. A year before I met Reverend Lawson, I heard him give a speech. It was really a sermon. And he said something that I will never forget. He said, I want y'all to stop saying that we worked for the civil rights movement. That is not what we were doing. We were working for the manifestation of the word of God on earth. It was not about civil rights. I will never forget that. Anyway, he closed and said, this is our problem. We have not yet learned how to be people. It does not say in the preamble of the Constitution, we the corporations. It does not say we the wealth grabbers, we the power seekers. It says in simple terms, we the people. If you all can help lead the way in getting that stamped on the consciousness of Memphis, you have no idea what it will do for our nation. And I happen to know with every last neuron of my brain that this is God's will, that this is what beloved community means. I want to see Memphis become we the people and show the meaning and amazement of people engaged in liberty, justice, and equality for all. Thank you.
That work? There it is. There it is. Thank you. I'm so glad Catherine has to preach after that phenomenal sermon. Followed that up and not me.
She'll be fine.
We're gonna open this up for some conversation, but I have 1,000 resonances with what you're talking about. How to tend to something that's a history and a place in a way that's not only preservation, it's truthfulness to what this place, like the vision that made the place in the first, like carrying it forward is not just fixing it in stone.
That's right.
I wonder if there's anything in that, in the way you had conversations about what has to come in your building, that you realized I got to ask this question about what love looks like. Like,
Yes.
were those two things alive in your mind at the same time? This is our
Literally
vision?
at all times. At all times. So this is one of the examples is so like, we're like, because I'm an artist, I'm a producer and a cultural strategist, I'm like, this building has to be about the stories that we tell. But the stories that we tell is more than just what happens on stage, right? And so in addition to having the primary part of the building be a performance space, there's also going to be a part in the building that is a museum that tells what actually happened, right? And it will not just talk about the strike, it'll talk about the social, economic, political, spiritual context of the city, right? And why the strike had to happen, right? And also, there'll be a place that'll be a center for restorative economics, because the work of King and the work of the strikers and the work of Lawson was not about just the sign, right? The I am a man sign was masterful storytelling, right? And it was also pointing to a material reality that did not exist. It said, I am a man, and what was implied was, therefore, I deserve to be safe and well paid at work, right? And so it's not, we cannot just get on stage and tell stories. We have to think about the embodiment of those stories in everyday life. So we must say, Union, let's watch an amazing show and sing great songs about why this happened and why it was important that it had to happen. And then we have to talk about it. We have to say, what did you see in that show? What did you learn? What did you hear that you'd never heard before? How did that hit you in your mind and in your heart and in your spirit? And then we have to say, like, so what does that mean for how we show up as human beings? You can't just watch the show or read a book or see a painting or watch a film and then go home and say, dang, that was so good. You have to go home and say, ooh, how do I transform? How do I wake up different tomorrow? How do I show up differently, right? How do I become a more loving human in my everyday actions? How do I make sure that our mayor is actually loving our people? How do we make sure that our state reps are acting out of love for the people who live in this state, right? How do I make sure that the principal at my kid's school is loving my child? And all the other kids who I'll never meet equally, right? Because what the truth is that love is justice in action. And you can't say you love and you can't tell stories about love and then not actually manifest that love in people's material condition. So yes, we are absolutely thinking about what love looks like as we think about the restoration of the building, because it must function as the arms and hands of love in our community.
Who's got a question? Have to drop the Reverend James Lawson preached. He couldn't make it to Calvary for our 100th anniversary of our Lenten preaching, but he was having some health issues a couple years ago, but he preached online, so you can go find it, his Calvary sermon.
You should definitely watch it, because that man, amazing.
Questions?
I don't know that it's a question, but as you talk about all of the storytelling and how important that is, I'm reminded of how frightening it is that our legislators are unteaching, requiring unteaching in schools. And the things that are uncomfortable, if we don't know about them, how do we move beyond them?
Yes. It's something I think about a lot. Probably no surprise. In my time in Memphis, one of the hardest lessons that I have had to learn is that sometimes the thing that's the biggest thing in the way is like actually not racism or sexism, or it's none of that. It's like people's emotional inability to have hard conversations, right? It's like, how are we supposed to get past all this stuff if we can't even talk about it? I literally have had people hang up on me when I'm like, hey, can we talk about power? Can we talk about race? Can we talk about our relationship? I don't want to talk about that. And one of the beautiful side effects of love is that it generates courage. And what we need more than anything right now is courage, because these are like literally the most difficult conversations in the history of humanity. You know what I mean? Like, this is complex to the nth degree. It is embedded in a way that we cannot undo it if we're not able to look at it. And the discomfort doesn't go away because you ignore it, right? It doesn't. You think about all the little things in your life that make you uncomfortable. When you don't look at them and you don't figure out how to talk about them, they get worse, they grow, they get entrenched, and they make you do crazy things that are harmful to yourself and to other people, right? And you just, the more we push down those feelings, it's like psychology 101. Y'all know this. The more you push down your feelings of discomfort and pain and anger and shame, the sicker you get, the more destructive that you get. And that's what we're seeing. Like, these same folks who are saying, don't teach my kids that, are also like being super destructive, super harmful, right? And again, like, and thinking they're doing it to other people, not realizing how much they're harming their own hearts. And it's hard. It's the hardest thing that we have right now. People who are not willing to tell the truth. Truth will set you free. That's what somebody told me.
Somebody said that.
Nobody ever said the easy truth will set you free. They just said the truth.
The couching this in terms of love as a cultural transformation, the energy that transforms the culture is really powerful, because that fear, it's occurring to me as you're describing this, that if you've ever been in a single loving relationship, you can't stay in that loving relationship without having the hard conversation.
You cannot.
Like,
I mean, you can,
pretend,
but you're going to be real sad at night.
And it's not going to be love. I mean, ultimately, you're
That's
cutting.
right.
So
That's
I appreciate the way you're couching these hard conversations as a culture in terms of, this isn't so you feel bad enough.
No.
This is so we get real enough to go forward having our relationship inspired by
the
something
catharsis of having gotten through a difficult conversation is one of the most liberating feelings that you could ever have. It really is. And because you get to release all the things that kept you in that cage. Like, have any of y'all ever done Brene Brown's work? Like, one of the most liberating things I've ever done is like to just read all those books and do the little things and the exercise and just be like, oh, yes, the courage does live in the heart. And there is no place for shame when there is love. And there is no place, right, for all of the things that keep us from being open and honest and connecting. And also, like, when you're blocked with all that shame, you cannot connect with other human beings. It keeps you from your actual birthright of human connection when you're not engaging in meaningful ways around your own shame and difficulty.
Well, now I just want to sit and think about that for a second instead of asking my question. And when it's like Matt, more of a response than a question, I think. But one of the things that I'm appreciating is just sitting and listening in your presence and the contagion. Oh, actually, I want you to go back to where, because the contagion of just being in their space with you and the hopefulness that I feel is real. And when you put this map up, it feels like there's the good version of contagion, right? Of like, I'm a lifelong Memphian. I'm coming up on 50. And I know there are spaces that I don't know the story of here, or that I kind of know, right? And so thinking about and honoring the perspective of Claiborne Temple that is about this corner and this intersection in this space, but then what radiates out, right? So love radiates, hope, and story of like, because it's not just an isolated building. It's connected to the empty lot and the old building, all. So I really appreciated your putting this up here as just a manifestation of the best kind of contagious.
Yeah. And I think, and the contagion is not just about the story, it's about the transformation, right? So like, when you think about the story of People's Grocery, which was like the first co-op ever in Memphis, right? It was 3 black doctors who started the store, and then there was a white grocery across the street, and they were real mad because everybody was going to the Black People's Grocery. They started a big gunfight, and then they eventually like lynched the 3 doctors who started the thing, right? So one, like, we need to tell that story because people don't know the story of Thomas Moss and the other 2 doctors, and their names deserve to be remembered. And then you say, okay, well, how do we honor that story and restore their intention? Not just bring their story back to life, but bring their actual intention back to life. And so then we partner with the Southeast Center for Co-ops. We're talking about having a co-op incubator at the back of Claiborne so that we can actually bring back the idea and the work of having co-op in Memphis, right? Because that's what they wanted. I bet you that they would rather have cooperative economics in Memphis than having people know their names if they had to choose, right? But we can do both. We can say, like, look at what these men did and how their legacy was torn away and how together we can help restore the honor of their names and their legacy and actually give Memphians who can't afford to start their own business alone have the access and capital to start businesses together. It's so powerful. It's so powerful. There's so many lessons and so much. We always talk about leveraging the story of the past to co-create the story of the future, because in every one of these stories is a blueprint for what the future of our city could look like, in my opinion. I could be wrong.
I'm not going to bet against you.
Thank you for your talk. That was just very well done.
Oh, thank you.
You know, everyone says Memphians are sort of down on themselves.
Yes.
Where do you see progress in our city? Where do you see things
Yes.
that excite you?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm like, do y'all know the Smurfs? Do y'all ever watch the Smurfs? So do you know the bad guy in the Smurfs, Gargamel? Yeah, how he had that like rain cloud over him. When I first came here, I would be like, why does Memphis have a Gargamel cloud over it? What is that? Because I didn't understand. Because when I see Memphis, I see like the most awesome city in America that I've ever lived in, the most creative, the most exciting, the most history, the richest city. Like, this community is incredible. And I would hear people say things like, well, we deserve this because we killed Dr. King. And I really feel like that the Memphians being down on themselves is like the result of compounded trauma over hundreds of years, because some of the most awful things in America happened in Memphis over our history. And I think that folks have absorbed and taken responsibility and like are holding shame about some of the things that have happened here. And for me, the way that we transform that is through actually looking at the stories, understanding the history, and then remembering all of the ways that we got out of those things. Like all of the things that Memphis created, not all the things only that Memphis destroyed. And you think about all of those things are like culturally rich, beautiful things that are centered in the human heart. And those are the things that will heal us and remind us that that's who we are and that's who we can be. And so that's part of the reason why the work at Claiborne has been so much about connecting through stories. So we used to have these events before we closed that we would come and we would have folks on the stage and tell stories, and people would have to sit in the audience and talk to each other about those things, right? To remember who we are and who each other is. And the power of that was like having people come up to me and say, thank you so much for your work. The last time I was in this building was March 28th, 1968, and I vowed I would never walk in here again because it was too painful. Thank you for doing this work so that I can come back to the place that I called my church home. Because that's the power of connection. That is the power of human connection, and the fastest way to connect to somebody else is through a story. It cuts everything else out. All the like nervousness and all the stuff that you feel like when you hear someone's story and you can see yourself in it, it is like lightning. It's magic. Oh my God, my sister's FaceTiming me. Hello. No, can't talk to you. So to me, that is how we release our shame as folks who live in a place that's sometimes really difficult. Even like today, it's still really difficult sometimes, right? Like the whole, the public safety conversation that we're having in Memphis, right? That like part of it is about actual statistics, right? Actual numbers, actual crime that's happening. And part of it is a narrative that we're holding that is separate from the facts. And Oh my goodness, leave me alone, sister. And 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 we're having this conversation about public safety in a vacuum, as if poverty and crime are not connected. And instead of saying, like, we're talking about more police and private police with bigger guns, instead of thinking about community ownership and economic development and what it looks like to actually create opportunity for the parts of our community that are suffering from poverty, right? Systemically. Y'all know what you know what I'm saying? I don't need to give y'all a lecture about economics, but you know what I'm saying. So I feel like this work that we're doing, for me, is the way that it's our contribution to helping to get past that. It's not the only answer, but it's the one that we have and the one that we're offering. It's like, let us think about the actual history of our city and our nation. Let's think about what those stories are telling us about the future, and let's think about what that looks like in practical application, and how we think about transforming our city from the inside out and making sure that opportunity and love and community is a fact every day.
What else? Somebody ask her another question. I want to have her talk and talk and talk. Yeah, good.
I want to know where you come from. How did you get to be who you are today? And how was Memphis lucky enough to find you? You are magnificent.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I was born in Harlem, and I grew up in Jersey. It's really my parents made me like this. Well, I feel like part of it is I was born this way, and I think that part of it is I had a home. I grew up in a home that nurtured the natural parts of me that you are seeing today. Like I said earlier, my parents, I think in a time where Black people in particular were having this debate about whether the answer for our collective liberation was civil rights or Black power, my parents were like, well, kind of both, but kind of neither. The answer is really culture. And so we grew up in a house where my family created a cultural container for us that taught us that we were important and powerful and special because we were Black and not in spite of, and because I was female and not in spite of. A lot of kids like me got a lecture that told them, like, when you're Black, you have to work twice as hard to get half as much. A lot of people get that speech at home, and it's not true. It's absolutely correct, but that's not what my parents told me. My parents told me you could be whoever you want to be. My parents told me, like, look at all these stories of all these incredible people that are in your lineage. Like, this is who you are. You are not what people on the street tell you you are. And there always art in my house. I grew up, like, I could learn how to use the record player. By the time I was 4 years old, I was playing records for myself and listening to all these amazing records and reading books. And I just love stories so much. I love them so much, so much. Probably because I was super shy as a child, too. Like, I didn't like to talk to people, so I got my self-expression and entertainment through doing things I didn't have to talk to other people to do, like read. But really, like, my parents taught me that humanity was my responsibility. I didn't have one of those parents who just told me to, like, go and find my fortune. I had a family who taught me that the most important thing was community, and that the future of humanity was all of our responsibility. So this work for me is like, it's not a job, it's not a career, it's really a vocation. It's really about, like, how do I fulfill the wishes of my parents? How do I help the parents, the America that my parents want so badly to come to fruition? Because they fought their whole life for equity and inclusion and love and connection and narrative power. Like, we get to tell our own story, and these are the ways that I feel like that can happen. This is my strategy to manifest my parents' vision of America in the flesh. I wish.
Any more? Yeah, Christine.
I say thank you so much. This
Thank
has been
you.
wonderful.
Thank
to
you.
I'm curious, like, of the kind of the obstacles or the the gifts of around getting the project going. I mean, the renovation to Claiborne is massive and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But how did you go about like the fundraising, was it an obstacle or was it?
Am I going about fundraising? Yeah, it's hard. It's the hardest thing I ever did, honestly, to be completely honest. And part of it is, I mean, the economics of this work is the hardest part because, because capitalism, you know what I'm saying? Like, right? And it's not a judgment. It's just that our economic system is not aligned with our vision. Right, our traditional economic practices and the things that people think are valuable and investable and important are not this. And so I have to spend a lot of time convincing might be the right word, but exploring the value of this work with people who are more in alignment with traditional economic rules, you know? And the thing is, in Memphis in particular, I'm about to say some controversial things, y'all, so get ready. Memphis in particular has been very difficult on the fundraising side because even though Memphis is the most philanthropic city in the country, the folks who decide how that philanthropy is distributed are not, how do you say, are more bought into the rules of traditional capital than they are into transformative rules of capital, right? And so the rule that says he who has the most money has the best ideas is very much alive in Memphis. And notice I said he, I did not say they, I said he. And so there are a lot of folks in Memphis who believe, like who are so charitable and like earnestly want Memphis to be different and better and earnestly want to be able to support the eradication of poverty and earnestly want to be able to help. And the ways that they are helping and funding are actually not helpful. And those same folks are sometimes not open to the critique or the alternative strategy or the support to say like, I know that you have this money because you played the game this way, but in order to get this, we have to play the game this way. And I tell this story a lot because it was so hurtful, but I tell it because I want us to understand like what we're actually in, right, in this city. And when we first started fundraising for Claiborne, we were talking to a whole bunch of donors and went to talk to one, and we were talking about community ownership, and we were talking about like real estate and businesses, right? Because our work at the Big We, and specifically with Claiborne, is about culture-based real estate development, supporting cultural entrepreneurs, small businesses, and the storytelling and culture making around the narrative. And so we've been talking about this now for 7 years. And in the beginning, we went and talked to a major donor, and he said, I don't know why you keep talking about ownership. I know a lot of black people, they don't talk about owning things. Black people don't want to own stuff. That was like a direct quote. And then he said, black people need 2 things, Jesus and a job, in that order. This, and that's like not a weird conversation to have here. It's not a weird conversation to have here. And my hope, my prayer for this city is that our charitableness, if that's a word, can like match our open-heartedness around strategy, because we have all the money that is required to be able to transform this city, but we do not have the strategy collectively. We do not. And the other thing that's important to know is that if you are talking about transformation at this level, philanthropy alone is not going to do it, right? First of all, because philanthropy is built so that you only spend 5% of your principal, right? So if you have $100 million, you only have to spend 5 of it every year. And you're rewarded for not spending the 95. So you're like, we're going to change the world with $5 million. And meanwhile, you just got $95 million chilling in the bank and not doing anything for anybody except for continuing to increase your bottom line, which is fine. But then we just have to be clear that our actual goal is to increase our bottom line and that our hobby is to help people, right? if we're going to actually invest in a powerful way, we have to think about how we're investing our principal, not just giving away our philanthropy. And we have to think about new, innovative economic tools that we can use, like low-cost and no-cost debt, like recoverable grants, like impact investment. And impact investment does not mean take the thing that you would normally invest over here and invest it over here and expect the same return. That's not what that means. That means like you're rethinking what enoughness looks like. Like, do you need to have $1 billion? Can you have 500 million? Is that going to cut it for you? Right? Do you need to have a 10% return? Can you get a 4% return and know that you just transform the lives of 5 generations? Right? We have to have a different conversation about the power and the usefulness of capital and what capital is for and who capital is for. And we also have to have a really hard conversation about how you got that capital in the first place. Because the money that some of us are holding is not really ours to begin with. I have a friend who is right now in a leadership program at Harvard, and they're talking to there's an office at Harvard who was talking about reparations. I know that's a scary word, but I'm going to say it anyway. Harvard's endowment is $78 billion. Billion dollars. And a lot of that they got because of their investment in slavery, right? And there's some calculation they did. They were like, if we gave out $5 billion right now today, it would take us like 3 years to make it back. Our endowment will just be flush again. But they're afraid to do the research, and they're afraid to make an investment, right? And I'm using that example because it's extreme and it makes you feel some kind of way, but that's exactly what happens in Memphis. There's hundreds of millions of dollars in this city, both investment capital, philanthropic capital, loan capital. There's enough to be able to make Memphis the shining star on the hill of America. There's more than enough. But we are investing it in ways that is actually going to get us more of the same. And those who have, those we call capital stewards, are not in deep enough relationship with community stewards to be able to align the strategy to be transformative, in my opinion.
Thank you, Anasa. I didn't expect to have a clear vision that there is something that in what you're doing that is church. It may not be aligned with a particular tradition, but you're talking about transforming culture through love.
Yes.
Not using shame, but being truthful about guilt.
Yeah.
And we could go on and on. We have to go to church, but we need to have you back again. We have to go to a church again. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you've shared with us.
Thank you all for having me. Thank you.
God bless you. One more quick ad. On Friday, Valerie Carr will be speaking here, and she's on her Revolutionary Love Tour. And she's a remarkable person. We've tried to get her at Linton Preaching and haven't. She's too big a star. She's got a TED Talk with 7 bazillion people who listen to it. She's a Sikh woman, S-I-K-H. That's her religious tradition. And it just fell into our lap. So Friday night, if you want to continue the love conversation, how it can transform a culture, come hear Valerie Carr and her.
Valerie is a great friend.
Oh.
I love her very much, and I was supposed to be doing that event with her, but I have to go speak Saturday morning in Minneapolis, so I can't be here. So please come and listen to Valerie. She is a gem of a woman.
Bless you.
Bless you.